This this session that we're going to do for this part is my absolute favorite. I just love where we describe for you guys some of the research of what's going on inside her head and inside mine in a way that is understandable for us, and kind of demystify those things that we think about the opposite sex, and quite frankly, those assumptions that we hold that are wrong when we think, you know, the reason she's doing that is because she wants to make me upset or crazy. And the fact of the matter is, that's not the case. It might just be that she didn't understand that I was different from her in such a way that she just didn't know how to relate to me.
There's a scripture you guys have probably heard, and if you have your Bibles, if you look at the great passage on marriage in Ephesians 5, there is a whole passage that talks about husbands, here's what you're called to do. Wives, here's what you're called to do. And it ends with, and all of this has relevance to what we're going to be talking about today, but it ends with this passage that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in the city of Ephesus, ends with this one little phrase, which is, each one of you, talking to the men, which is who he was most recently talking to, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. And it is fascinating as we started digging into this research, and I won't go into explaining all the same things that we explained last time, but because we're social researchers and we have now done these massive studies, not just that apply in America, but around the world, of how men and women are wired. What we have found in these huge studies, we've spent almost $500,000 on the research over the last 13 years in order to be able to bring really rigorous look at how men and women are wired. And it turns out that this command that the Apostle Paul gives and that God has for each marriage is actually there is a profound reason behind it. It's because God knows how he has wired men, and God knows how he has wired women. And there's something that is so easily missed that we're going to cover today briefly about the differences in how men and women are wired.
And I should point out, I was a little joking earlier when Pastor had us up here, and I said we can understand it all in 20 minutes. Not quite 20 minutes, but
it's pretty simple. There is pretty simple stuff. Some of the most highly
leveraged information that you can learn and hopefully understand in just those 20 minutes that can have a dramatic impact. And we're going to be talking about romantic relationships, you know, in this particular side of the talk. But, you know, fact of the matter is, you know, whether it's understanding Shaunti as my wife, we encounter women all over the place. I have a daughter. I also had a mother. And
I have a son.
And those relationships are also impacted with this knowledge. So even if you're not in a romantic relationship, trust me, the information can be useful in those other relationships.
The key is that we have to confront some of this understanding, because we come to this topic with all these assumptions about how men are wired or how women are wired. Some of those assumptions are wrong. And we have to be willing to allow God to open our eyes and change our minds if there's any areas that need to be changed. Are you guys willing to do that today? Are you willing to do that today? All right. Well, actually, do you mind if we just stop and pray? Sure. You want me to? Okay. Lord, we come before you knowing that there are some things that we probably just don't see about the other people in our lives, and especially that spouse for those of us who are married. Lord, I pray right now that you would open our eyes to those things that we just didn't know that we didn't know. We give you permission to change our minds if there are any areas that need to be changed. And we're so grateful, Lord, that when you walked this earth, you were so good at opening blind eyes. And we pray you would do that today. We ask this in the matchless name of Jesus. Amen. So here's the big aha moment. All right, you ready for this huge statement? It turns out, big surprise, men and women are just different. I know that's a shock to everybody in the room. But it turns out that there actually are some really profound differences that we tend not to see, and they tend to affect relationships, especially a marriage relationship, every single day, and we don't understand what's going on underneath the surface. And all too often, not always, but all too often, it is because of these differences. Now, we should probably say from the beginning, if we haven't said this already, when we talk about how men are wired, how women are wired based on these huge surveys, these huge studies, this is very rigorous data, but we're making generalizations, and there are always exceptions. I mean, by definition, if 75% of men said one way, by definition, 25% didn't, right? Everybody's an individual, and same thing with women. So the key is to try to learn this and to say, how does this impact my spouse if you're married, or if you're not and you're looking forward maybe to some point in the future? Learning this stuff is one of the most important ways you can save your marriages in advance. Or maybe you've been married before and it didn't end well, and you're looking back to try to figure out, what was it that I did? What do I need to learn going forward? These things, even the most simple stuff, can really, truly change a lot. The biggest differences that we're going to cover today stem from the fact that it turns out that men and women actually have very different primary insecurities underneath the surface. And we tend not to realize what is that insecurity, that vulnerability that's in the other person's heart. We saw this, we were doing a series of focus groups that brought this out really clearly over a couple of nights. The first night, I was in a focus group with a group of kind of college-age young men, 20-year-old men. And the next night, I was going to be in that same room with a group of college-age young women. And as I started the night first with the men, we were in one of those conference rooms. You know those conference rooms that you have the big table and then those whiteboards on the walls with the doors that close? You know what I'm talking about? So picture that, whiteboard on each wall. And the first night there with the guys, and I opened up this whiteboard, and I told the guys, I said, I want to do something a little bit different tonight. I want to chart and just spend all night, it was this huge whiteboard, spend all night kind of digging into what are the things that when someone says this or does this, that it doesn't feel so good. What are the things that, hurts your feelings? Not, that any 20-year-old guy is going to say, it hurts my feelings, but, you know what I mean. What are those things that just feel bad? And then, what are the things that feel great? When someone says this or does this, that it lights you up. What are those things? We spent all night on it. We got it all just right, and at the end of the night, I looked at my watch and I realized, oh my gosh, we are totally out of time. We've gone past our time. This huge whiteboard, the women are going to be in the same room tomorrow night, and I don't have time to erase this thing, so let's just, close the doors. So the next night, I'm in there with the college-age young women, again, 20, 21-year-old young women, and I asked that same question. Basically, what are your primary fears? What are your primary needs? Kind of was the way it worked. And I said, what are your primary fears and your primary needs as girls? And this one young woman raised her hand and interrupted me. And she said, excuse me, but I really object to this language. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, look, it's not our fears and our needs as girls. I mean, we're all just people. Right? And we have the same fears, we have the same needs as people. And I said, okay, that's fine. Let's chart, you're over here on this whiteboard, let's chart your fears and your needs as people. And so we spent all evening on it. We got it all just right. At the end of the night, I purposefully left about 5 minutes at the end. You knew what I was going to do, right? And I asked these girls, and I said, the guys were in here last night. Does anybody want to see what they said? Of course, these 20-year-old girls are like, yes, So I opened up this whiteboard with all the guys' comments on it. And I stood back, and I watched the faces of these young women as they were kind of like, and their heads were swiveling back and forth, their jaws were dropping open, because there was not one word the same. Not one. Except for, and. What was on the board? It turns out that for women, starting with, the women's side, the question, and we've now done the surveys to understand the question, the worry, the insecurity, the vulnerability in the heart of women, actually starting with girls from age 15 to age 75. And the question is essentially, am I lovable? Am I special? Am I beautiful? Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? And so we as women love to feel loved, right? God says, however, men, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. We love to feel loved. That is what lights us up. And that's kind of what we think is the whole point of the relationship, right, ladies? If you're not going to feel loved, what's the point, right? Well, it's interesting. The men, again, boys from age 15 to men up to age 75 on the survey, they were kind of like, like feeling loved is nice, but it didn't make it on the board. It turns out that the question in the heart of a man is totally different. The question is, am I able? For a woman, am I lovable? For a man, am I able? Am I adequate? Do I measure up? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? Think about it again. For a woman, am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? For a guy, am I any good at what I do on the outside? And then that insecurity, that vulnerability is totally different. Now, to some degree, we're all insecure about everything, and we all need everything. But the heartbeat stuff, the stuff that it turns out will most hurt the other person's feelings, is very different. In most cases, again, there's always exceptions, but in the vast majority, 75 to 85% of men or women. And so it lends itself, for the men, it lends itself to a totally different set of primary needs. Like I said, we women love to feel loved. For men, it turns out that that's not what lights them up. It turns out on the surveys, we were fascinated when we first got the survey results back, the very first survey of men. The men on the survey said if they had to make a choice, and by the way, they wouldn't want to have to make this choice. This is sort of a forced choice, but if they had to, the men on the survey said they would actually give up feeling that their wife or their girlfriend loved them if they could just feel that she appreciated him, that she respected him, that she trusted him, that she believed in him, and that she admired him. And all of those things were far more important to the average man even than feeling that his wife loved him. That is a huge, big deal difference between men and women. That is the reason, I think, why God says, for the husbands, each of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Because God knows we each have this individual need underneath the surface, born of these insecurities that we don't have time to go into it, but it goes all the way back. If you look to the Garden of Eden story and the story of what happened when we lost the garden and how the curse happened, and you see these two insecurities start to rise to the surface. And so we have to understand that there is this power of underneath the surface, understanding what these two insecurities are and what the need is that arises from them. And Jeff will talk in a bit about understanding and talking to the men about the women's side of things. But let me sort of wrap through the women understanding the men's side first. So like I said, those 5 things that a guy would give up feeling loved if he could just feel respected, appreciated, trusted, believed, and admired by the primary woman in his life. And it's ironic that for us as women, that is actually difficult for us because we women, we're really good at showing love, right? That's why this is so ironic, is because saying I love you comes naturally to most of us. Ladies, seriously, how many of you find that the words I love you when you're in a relationship with your husband or maybe a close boyfriend, how many of you find it comes naturally to just say I love you? How many? Seriously, you can raise your hands. It's okay. Don't need to be scared. Most women, that comes out of us naturally. We'll say, honey, I love you. We'll do things that we hope he'll find to be loving. And at the same time, without realizing it, maybe we're criticizing him a lot. Or maybe we're questioning his decisions all the time. Or maybe we're, I don't know, telling him what to do every now and then. Okay, at least I'm not the only one. No, see, actually, I can see some of the faces of some of the men here in the congregation. Some of you are sitting next to your wives, and I can actually see the look on your face where you're kind of like, I can't nod. I can't nod. I'll get in trouble if I nod. But sometimes we women do that. We'll tell our man what to do. We'll go into field marshal mode, or we'll question the decisions or criticize him or change what he just did. And we have no idea that they seem very little to us, these little things that we've been doing, what we are saying by those words and those actions, we don't intend it, but what we're saying is, no, you're not able. No, you're not adequate. And oh, by the way, that thing you did on the outside, it wasn't good enough. And we have no idea that we're even saying that, we're sending that message pretty consistently, like multiple times a day. And because we don't realize what is down deep in the heart of the other person, we don't realize that that is a painful insecurity. And therefore, that is that thing that actually most hurts the other person's feelings. And we have no idea that we're even doing it. This is why it is so crucial, as we talked about in the last session, the last service, that Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, by wisdom a house is built, through understanding it's established, through knowledge is how its rooms are going to be filled with the rare and precious treasures of delight and joy and peace instead of contention and unhappiness. Is so often we just don't know what's most hurting the other person's feelings. We don't intend to, but we're hitting it. So how do we for us as women, still staying on the women's understanding men's side, how do we avoid hitting that? How do we avoid sending that painful message? And then what is a positive message that we can send instead? What's a positive way that we can handle this? So let me just tackle those two briefly, and then we'll switch so Jeff can talk about understanding women. First, how do you avoid sending that negative message of you're not able, you're not adequate, you don't measure up, what you did on the outside wasn't good enough? So it turns out it is the day-to-day, the stuff that sends that message, ladies, it turns out it is the little day-to-day ways that we say, I think you or what you just did is inadequate. That's it. It's any little thing that sends a message, I think you are inadequate or what you just did was inadequate. That's all. That is that one thing that sends a very, very painful message. And I'll give you an example because I always learn best from examples. So I was sitting next to a guy on an airplane talking about this recently. I should explain, I interview every man I come across. I feel kind of bad for the guy who's sort of trapped next to me on the airplane for 2 hours, but it's really good data. And if he is bored and he's reading the airline magazine, he's fair game. So I got into a conversation with the guy sitting next to me on the airplane one day, and we were talking about this. And he, as he started talking about his relationship, his shoulders, I could just tell they started to slump. He just looked really defeated. I felt really bad for the guy. And he said a phrase that I had heard from Jeff in prior years before we started all this research. I had heard Jeff say so many times, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I can guarantee that probably at least half of the women in this room have heard their man use this phrase and had no idea what he was talking about. This guy said, look, I love my wife, but nothing I do is ever good enough for her. And yeah, we always hear the nods of reaction, yeah. And we don't know what that means. Now, thankfully, because of the research, when he said this, I thought I knew what it meant, so I said, can you give me an example? And he said, yeah, I'll just tell you something that happened last night. He explained that they'd had some friends over for dinner. The kitchen was a wreck. His wife had to run out to a meeting or something. And she had said, honey, while I'm gone, could you clean up the kitchen so that when I come home, we can go right to bed? And he said, sure, no problem. And he said, so I clean the kitchen. She comes home from her meeting. She kisses me on the cheek and looks over my shoulder into the kitchen and goes, huh, and grabs a sponge and starts re-cleaning all the countertops. And he said, it just kills me that nothing I do is ever good enough for her. Now, I'm looking at some of your faces as women, and some of you are thinking the same thing that I was the first, 20 times I heard this kind of thing, because some of us as women listen to this and we kind of go privately, dude, get over it. That should not bother you. You are so oversensitive. Really? And I finally realized, after I heard this multiple times from different guys, it's like God whacked me over the head, and I finally realized, wait a minute. The reason I am saying that should not bother you is because it wouldn't bother me. Remember, he's not me. He's wired very differently by a God who knew what he was doing. And I asked this gentleman, is there anything that would have changed how you received that? How that felt to you? And he looked at me like I was nuts. I get that look a lot. And he said, yeah, if she just would have appreciated what I'd tried to do. Like if I missed the crumbs under the toaster, she can clean it later when I'm not looking, And I realized how often we as women, unintentionally, without realizing it, We send that signal that what you did on the outside, that nice thing you tried to do, it wasn't good enough. And we don't realize that is his most painful feeling. It's all the little things. So in addition to avoiding sending that painful message that we didn't even know we were sending, in addition to trying to catch that so that we avoid triggering that and hitting that raw nerve, what is it that we can do on the positive side? What is it that we can say that makes a difference? Uh-oh, what?
So Shaunti, I'm going to tell on her a little bit. She's a terrific student and researcher, and she loves to learn all of this stuff. So she set about thinking that, okay, if I hear that respect, what the guy does on the outside is so important, just as, we have that in Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wife, wives, respect your husband. So if I like it when Jeff says, I love you to me, I'll change the way I speak to him in such a way. So for about 3 weeks after she's learning all of this stuff, she would come around at random times throughout our day, and she'd say, you know what, Jeff? I'd say, yeah. She'd say, I respect you. And I'd go, okay. And then a little later, I so respect you, what you did there. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks, and I really appreciated it. But it just didn't have the same ring to it that I love you probably does to her. So finally I had to just kind of go, can we time out? I know what you're doing and I appreciate it, but it's not quite working the same way. I don't know what will, and so that began a quest.
That began a quest, yes. So I went on this quest as we were doing all these other studies. I'm trying to figure out, what is it that we as women can say to our man that will have that same powerful impact that I love you does to us? Because ladies, you know how when your husband says, I love you, it doesn't just say one thing. It says like 5 things to you, right? It doesn't just say, I have affection for you. It says, you're mine. It says, I'm so glad I married you. It says all these things that speak to our question in our hearts. So I went on this quest to try to figure out what is it that you can say that speaks to his question and in his heart. And I finally found it in the study that we talked about last of the happiest couples. It turns out it is a small phrase, ladies, a very small phrase that you can say to your man. Anybody want to guess what it is? I'm proud of you. That's very good. That's a very close second. I'm proud of you. I appreciate you. That's good. That's good. Thank you. She got it. Believe it or not, ladies, statistically, saying thank you has the same emotional impact on him that I love you does for you. It is it's all the little things of life. It's noticing them.
That's the key. Honestly, it is noticing those things that he has done.
The little things. The
little things. And then telling him you appreciate it.
Like this morning, poor Jeff, we have our kids here, and he was starving to have breakfast. We had gotten eggs and stuff at a grocery, and he was starving to have breakfast. But the kids kept saying, oh, can I have this, Dad? And can I have that, Dad? And he was making the next toast and the next eggs. The poor guy.
And I used to own a restaurant, so I'm the guy who gets the cooking.
He tends to be the guy that gets the cooking jobs. And to hear, Dad, thanks for making breakfast, that says, I noticed what you did on the outside and it was good and I appreciate it. It is an emotionally powerful moment for a man. And we women don't even realize that it matters so much because we tend to think it. We don't tend to say it. It doesn't come out as naturally as I love you does. Ladies, if you will change this one thing, it will change so much in your relationship, assuming that your man is like the majority. And the numbers here were really, really high. I think it was 87% or some 89%. It was a huge percentage of men that said that this is something that would really fill them up. And it's all the, just to reiterate, ladies, it is the little things of life that you would never think it even matters. It matters. Okay, just to wrap it up, I need to toss it over to Jeff. But I was doing this women's conference right after the survey came out. I speak a lot on, I do a lot of women's conferences in the U.S. and actually in other countries. And the survey where we had figured this out had just come out. The book hadn't come out yet. Like, we hadn't finished all the work on it. But I was so excited to share with these women in this women's conference what I'd learned, that I shared this thing about thank you being, his equivalent of I love you. And I see in this huge room, about 1,000 women in this auditorium, this one woman sitting fairly near the front. She pops up and marches out the door. And I know sometimes there's things that, a woman can be offended by some of the things that I'm saying. I know that happens, and it's like, gosh, that's kind of too bad. She comes up to me at the book table in the lobby afterwards, and her eyes are so red. It turns out she hadn't been offended. She'd been convicted. And she said, I realize I never say thank you to my husband. Like, it just doesn't occur to me. Like, I'm thinking it, I don't think to say it. And she said that morning on her way to the women's conference, her husband had been putting up a light fixture in their living room. And she'd been wanting it replaced for a while, and he was working on it, and apparently it was a really tough job, and he's up there on a ladder, and he's sweating. And she said it might have been like a 5 curse word job. Like one of those. And she said, I marched by him. I sort of waltzed by him. I didn't even think to say thank you. I just said, bye, honey, and left for the conference. And she said she was so convicted. She ran out into the lobby, and she texted her husband, and she said, honey, I did not say thank you this morning when I left. Thank you so much for putting up that light thing. You know that's been something that's been bugging me, and I've been so looking forward to this. Thanks for keeping our house looking so nice. I can't wait to see you later. Some little text message like that. She comes up to me a couple minutes later and shows me the text string from her husband, and it says, who are you and what have you done with my wife? She's like, I think I need to work on this. I said, we all need to work on this. And ladies, just realize as you do, you are speaking to that deepest heart that God knows that your husband has.
So her heart, what's going on inside of that? When we decided to write the book, for men only, what you need to know about the inner lives of women, understanding women, folks just kind of went, that's impossible. And so for us guys, what we tend to do is we kind of go, yeah, I can't understand them. They're kind of random. What's the use? And we give up. Well, I want to tell you, you can. And here is one particular thing, and Shaunti talked about it at the very beginning. What's that deepest insecurity and deepest need that she has? If we will answer that question, I guarantee you that there will be greater peace, greater happiness, your understanding will be heightened significantly, and what you would feel is her random actions will be a whole lot less. Because now you're able to run these things through a filter and be able to understand what's really going on inside her at the core. So at the core, here's what she has shared about how important it is, and in Ephesians it talks about love. What we have found from the surveys, from the research, is what may not be surprising to us is how much our wives or the important women in our lives need love. But what's really surprising for us is how easy it is for them not to feel it. And when they are not feeling it, essentially there is a question that is rolling in their head all the time. It's not there at the front part of the brain, but it's there at the back. And it's that question that Shaunti alluded to. Does he really love me? Am I lovable? Would he choose me all over again? And when things in our relationship kind of create little conflicts, little problems, all of a sudden that question that was maybe in the back of her mind moves to the front, and it creates in her a feeling of discomfort and anxiousness. What's the technical sound of that feeling? Okay, yeah, that was it.
Are we okay?
And that's exactly it. And now for us guys, we're confused and perplexed by this because I got to tell you, we don't have that same kind of level of insecurity. And again, Shaunti says we all, have all insecurities kind of in common in many of them, but at its deepest and at its core. So for us guys, when Shaunti and I got married, I knew she loved me. I knew it. And I kind of ceased asking that question. It just didn't arise in my mind. For you?
Not so much.
Not so much.
You need to know, guys, when your wife walks down the aisle and you get married and you sign the marriage papers and you go, okay, good, done, like on to the next thing, right? You need to know, in her brain, there is no switch in her brain that gets flipped like you, that gets flipped to the, oh, now I feel permanently loved position, right? That switch doesn't exist in the female brain. That question, am I lovable? All that does is just become, does he really love me in marriage?
And in the course of our interactions day to day, we are always there's the opportunities to trip that question and to move it from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. And so let's talk a little bit about what it is that causes that to get flipped and that question to arise and create this level of anxiousness. The first one is probably pretty easy, pretty self-evident. It's conflict. So let me give you a little example, illustration. So Shaunti and I could be having a discussion, over breakfast one particular day, and it's getting a little heated in the discussion. And then I look at my watch and I go, I got a client meeting I got to get to. So I excuse myself, I get in my car, back down the driveway. Guys, what happens to my thoughts about that discussion or argument that I've just been having with Shaunti? What do I do with it? Click. Off it goes, and I drive off to my client meeting, and I carry on with my work throughout the day. And when I come back at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself, hoping that she's done the same thing, and so she's maybe forgotten all about it. So I roll in, and has that occurred?
Ladies?
What has happened?
Instead, what's happened is that underground question that I have, it's not in marriage, it's not just, am I lovable? In marriage, it's, are we okay? It's, does he still love me? Is he glad he married me? That has now risen up and it's roiling all day, this, are we okay kind of feeling. And that is going to churn in a woman's heart until she's reassured.
And now I've got to give you guys, you know what this feels like. You do. You know what this feels like. It's just that we reserve it for something else. And I'm going to make this really quick. But if I were to ask you guys to raise your hands, I'm not going to do it. But if I were, if I were to say the question, how many of you guys never, ever, ever think about how you're going to provide either for yourself or your family, worry about your job or anything like that? It just doesn't arise. I don't think about it ever. Most people out there, most guys would say, it's not me. Absolutely. It's just kind of always there in the back of our mind about work, about career, about providing, about finances. They're just always there. And as some guys have described it, look, I have to kind of keep it always there because, the economy could go bad, our company could go south, or I could even be 3 or 4 mistakes on the job away from being fired. And as I was sharing that with a group of women, one woman said, that's exactly how we feel about you and our relationship. We feel that we need to monitor and manage and think about it all the time because we could just be 3 or 4 arguments away from this thing starting to spiral down. I thought, really? And they said, absolutely. So that's the one, the trigger, conflict. Another one, withdrawal, which tends to be my famous way of handling conflict. When we have an argument, Shaunti would constantly be talking to my back as I'm walking away, which isn't good. I'm telling you guys, it's not a good solution because that just compounds the feeling within her.
Like if conflict makes it go, when he withdraws, when he wants to walk away, then it's like, then it's even worse because now it's even more difficult to get that reassured.
Third one, silence. Who knew? I'm kind of an introvert, so I like being quiet. I like not talking to people, sometimes even Shaunti. And so sometimes I can be silent if my favorite sports teams have lost. I mean, I can just not want to talk for
I'm sure
10, 12 hours.
None of the other guys have that feeling, right?
One woman said, when he's silent, it must be about me. They're running it through that grid, and it creates that level of uncertainty and anxiousness. And then the fourth one could be just, has nothing to do with you, but just life has been tough. And she's just worn out. Kids, job, life, friends, all of those things. So what do we do about this? If this feeling can come up and if it can create this level of unpleasantness and uncomfortableness and all of these things within her, as Christ said, we're to love her as he loved the church. So what do we do as guys, knowing that there is this kind of fragile side of her? How can we solve that? How can we fix that? Well, I'm going to give you 2 things. First is what to do once that's been triggered and that question has come up. That's the first. And then the second one is actually even better because it's preventative. How to even keep it from arising, the question, from the back of her brain to the front in the first place, even if you do have some of these triggers that have happened. So the first one, what do you do once there has been kind of this question arise because you're in conflict? So for Shaunti and me, when we're in a conflict, in an argument, I'll tell you, her brain works so much faster than mine. And she can talk and make it, and she would oftentimes say, what are you thinking or feeling right now? And I'd say, I don't know.
I'm like, how can you not know what you're thinking, right?
And the fact is, I don't know. I can't describe it. I can't articulate it in words. I know that I'm upset. I know that something's going on and I'm angry, but I don't know why necessarily that I can communicate effectively to her. So, excuse me, I just need some time away to process, to work through my own thoughts.
That's statistically very common for men, by the way.
So here's what you do, guys. And this is honestly, we tested this out on the survey, and 90-some%.
I think it was 95%.
If you will do this in those moments, you need some time away, you're in a conflict, you're having an argument, and you need some time to gather your thoughts, here's what you do. You say something to the effect of, honey, I'm angry right now, and I need my space, but I want you to know we're still okay. Do you see what I've just done? What the guy who says that has just done? He said, look, I can't continue on in this discussion. I got to get away. I've got to figure out what's going on inside of me. But don't begin to think that this is the start of those 3 or 4 arguments where our relationship is going on the rocks. Don't think that at all. We're okay. This isn't that.
Was 95%.
95%. Now, there's a big caveat with this. If you say this, the women have said, oh, okay, I'll let him go. I can disengage, and I'm not going to be tormented by what could be happening here. So, one big caveat: you got to come back at some point. I mean, one lady said, if I have to chase him down 3 days later to re-engage on this, all that goodwill that he got at the beginning is gone. You know, so,
Yeah, exactly.
so come back. But here's the other good side of that. The women said, actually, by virtue of him coming back and re-engaging in whatever it was that caused the conflict in the first place, that matters so much more than whatever it was we were fighting about in the first place. So that's a great thing. So that's that. Now what to do so that even in the event that you have a conflict or something, it still doesn't trigger that feeling of insecurity for her about, does he really love me? So it's a preventative thing. And this is so much more valuable than even the fix once it's been raised. So, because I don't want Shaunti to have those feelings in the first place.
Thank you.
So is there a way that I can prevent her from having that? And you can, and it's done by one simple word: pursuit. And I love it because every time I say that, every guy always goes, what's that mean? And what pursuit is telling her every day through your actions that you are choosing her all over again and that you do love her. And you go, okay, what does that look like? How do you help me? Help me out. Tell me what to do, Jeff. And so here's what you do. You do the things, if you're married now, you do the things that you were already expert at. It's the things you did in order to get her to marry you, when you were dating. And through the States, whenever we say this, I can see the men's shoulders just slump. Because it's like, oh my gosh, that was so exhausting. I mean, yeah, okay, I did a lot of stuff when I was dating.
I'm looking at their faces. It's not just in the United States.
My gosh, I got a job now. We got a mortgage. I mean, we bought a house. We got kids. How am I going to do that stuff? To the answer, which is?
So, you guys, you're thinking of the big exhausting things, like, the candlelight dinners and the picnics in the park, and all that stuff is great. It's not like that's bad. That's all great, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is sending a message. That message that I still love you, that I would choose you all over again. Those kinds of messages that she needs to know every day. And you can send that message, I'm choosing you all over again today, by reaching across and taking her hand when you're walking through a parking lot. Car park, I think you call it. I mean, that says, I would choose you all over again. By sending her the text message. When you've been having a bad day at work and you just stop for a second, you send her a message that says, man, this has been such a terrible day. My boss is on me. I can't wait to see you later. I love you so much. Click. 10 seconds. She'll save that text message because that says, I would choose you all over again. It's these little messages of pursuit every day.
And let me, in wrapping this up, let me share with you guys, in that whole pursuit thing, you got to get outside of your own head and don't run it through like, what would I want to see happen? Or what would because she's not you again. This was driven home, right? It was kind of at the same time that we were writing some of this stuff.
Actually it was.
And we were working on a chapter, and it was lunchtime, and we were both hungry, and so I said, why don't we go grab a sandwich somewhere? So, yeah, you remember how we first met, it was over sandwiches. So I'm a sandwich guy. So we drove, we went to this little kind of shopping area, and we parked in the car park. And I parked there, and Shaunti, it was a lane of parked cars, and we were walking up to the sandwich shop up here. And as we're walking, we're talking, and Shaunti is in the middle, and I'm here walking kind of beside this row of cars. And I noticed a car pulling down the aisle, down the way that we were walking in. And so I walked over to Shaunti, and I kind of just put my hand at the small of her back and pulled her kind of close to me, and we walked and went inside. That was it. The next day, we are doing a focus group with about 7, 8 women. And as we were sitting there and we were talking about what are some of these things that guys can do?
These little things.
These little things.
I would choose you all over again.
So she was talking to these women. She goes, just yesterday, Jeff and I went out for a sandwich. And as we were walking through the car park, he walked over to me and put his hand at the small of my back, and he pulled me close to him, and we walked in together. To which all of the women in that focus group went, ah. Exactly. To which I was going, oh my gosh, didn't realize it. Because let me tell you what was going through my head the day before. So we are sitting, we get out, exit our vehicle, and we're walking down there, and I see this car, and I'm going, she doesn't see the car. She is not looking at it. It's going to hit her. Okay, I guess, and I pull her close to me, and we walk in. So that was going through my head at one point. At another level, I was wrestling with actually doing that. Not because I wanted the car to hit her. No, not that. But because I put myself, if our roles were reversed, and I was the one out walking in the center, and she walked over and did that to me, I'd have gone, I see the car. I'm not going to get hit. So she didn't read any of that into it. She just instead, and all the other women, read it as, oh. So for guys, I can't stress this enough. When you are thinking about those things, those little things that you can do for her, you have to get out of the guy brain and kind of put some of this stuff to work, and it's a lot easier than you thought. They are not as random and unknowable as what you've always been, what you and your mates have talked about over all your lives. It's not that way. They can be understood, and if you will apply yourself to understand what's going on inside of their heart and mind, your life will be so much richer, and you'll be fulfilling what the Lord asks us to do as men, to love them as Christ loved the church. So, thank you all for listening so much. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.